Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, this is Rachel Cook. I'm the COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of HCMx Radio Podcast. I'd like to warmly welcome today with me Samantha Lane, the Content Director from SAP Litmos. Welcome, Samantha.
Hi, happy to be here.
It's great to see you, and it's fun. The last time we got together was at our HCM Excellence Conference earlier, I believe in the year, and now we're together online. So we've been doing these podcasts with the webcam. So it's a new way of interacting, which is the topic of our discussion. And also with us joining is Dave Wentworth, our Principal Learning Analyst. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, Rachel. Hey, Sam. Thanks for letting me join today.
Great to be together virtually. And a little bit about SAP Litmos. Samantha is as I mentioned, the Content Director, and SAP Litmos, most of you are familiar, is a solutions organization, and they are the future of rapidly implemented training for the customer-focused enterprise. The solution combines a powerful LMS, SAP Litmos training, with a robust course library, SAP Litmos training content. They have been a great partner of ours. We've worked with them for many years now, and most recently, Dave and Sam are talking about the impact of COVID and how it's impacted their organization, their clients. And so we're going to continue that discussion today. Sam, can you tell us a little bit also about your background? And I know you've been in the industry for quite some time. And so share a little bit with our listeners today about your passion and your career journey.
Sure, yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I oversee content for, and content, that's, we used to call it marketing communications, right? Now we call it content, but it's basically all the written branding for SAP Litmos. And I've been with Litmos for about 3 years now, but prior to that, I was with Calidus Cloud, which was the organization that SAP acquired, and even an organization before that all rolled up into what is now SAP. And we're thrilled to be a part of SAP. It's a wonderful company to work for, and sort of famously so. But prior to all this Calidus and SAP stuff, I have been involved in B2B marketing, B2B tech marketing specifically for, it's getting around 20 years. It might even be more than 20 years, yikes. But very specifically, I've had a very targeted career in the language world. So again, focus on messaging, the written branding, creative strategy, and kind of all things content, really my whole career in the B2B tech space specifically. So I've gotten to work in different areas, not just e-learning, all different B2B type technologies, but it's been a fun and an exciting career. As you guys well know, tech has been a fun ride.
It's ever changing. And even more so now. Dave, can you tee us up a little bit about some of our research and, particularly around what we've done with COVID and how it's impacting businesses, and what do you think, kind of the current state where we are right now?
Yeah, sure. And, that was obviously the driver behind why, Samantha and I had that webinar to sort of go over where things are. And I think we're at a stage now, Brandon Hall Group, we've been doing COVID-based research since early March, really. I know for many folks that's not really the beginning, but that's the time when it really started to affect everyone, and we saw that it was sort of a much bigger issue. And just watching how things have changed, and I think the point of the discussion that Samantha and I were having and are going to have today is about, it's this transition away from looking a few feet in front of us like how are we going to deal with what's going on right now, to, okay, what does this mean moving forward? What does it really look like? And that's why I'm glad that we have Samantha, because taking that sort of technology provider perspective, they have a lot of insight into how technology is and will be used. But I think the big driver is that obviously no one's going to be surprised by everything has changed, right? The idea that, remote work is the rule of the day, and even organizations that swore up and down they would never let anybody work from home suddenly have had to let people work from home. And I think what we're seeing is companies, for the most part, are realizing, oh, this isn't so bad. Actually, it seems to be working out, and it's actually, we can make this work if we do the right things, put the right things in place. And that's what this is about, is everybody figuring out what is that. And it created this really interesting dynamic in learning, especially because, for years, folks like Samantha and myself have been talking to people about the benefits of digital and virtual learning, and how it's a great piece of the learning strategy and what the benefits are. And everyone seems to agrees, and everyone nods their head. Yep, I get that. It just, there hasn't been a lot of movement on it. But then now you come in and say, okay, everybody has to work from home, and you can't have ILT anymore. Suddenly, the decision to explore these technologies has become an imperative. And so, not that we like to say I told you so, but this is the stuff that companies should have been doing for a while. And those companies that have embraced that were prepared somewhat for this, right? But the idea is that, look, we've seen in our research for years, the vast majority of companies do most of their learning delivery via ILT. I think our research says like 96% of companies use it to some degree. When you compare it to all the different types of modalities, it's always number one. It's been number one for as long as we've been measuring it. And I've always said, oh, it'll be number one far into the future. Prior to this happening, I couldn't foresee this situation. So we're seeing a huge change where, like, I think it was 85% of companies in our L&D benchmarking study said COVID has forced them to reduce their use of ILT by 20% or more, meaning basically it's almost off the map at this point. So yeah, and so Sam, we've talked about this a little bit, but you see this from obviously your clients, right? It's not only just prospects or companies that say, okay, hey, we need to explore technology, but it's companies that already have your technology. They're like, okay, now what do? We haven't maybe been using it to the fullest. Those are the kind of conversations you're having, right?
Yeah, and we've seen really remarkably a lot of our customers and even new customers have really risen to the challenge. It's been pretty cool to see, and even in the webinar, David, we talked about some use cases that we have at SAP Litmos where we saw organizations who, like you said, even if they already were using a digital learning platform, whether it was Litmos or not, who very rapidly switched from a partially, or as you were saying, a mostly ILT model to an entirely online learning model. And we're talking within like a matter of weeks, not months, which is really remarkable because a lot of our clients are global. They're distributed. They're not rinky-dink clients by any means. We have, there are large organizations that are, doing learning across countries and, with thousands of employees. And we saw some incredible agility and adaptability with clients that switched over and went to a purely online learning model. And as you and I talked about on the webinar, David, it's not just a matter of going, oh, let's take our ILT curriculum and then just slam it into the LMS and make it virtual. It's not that easy. So these companies really, the commitment was there and the focus was there to shift even strategically in how the courses and the learning paths were presented to go to that fully online model.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing is it was a learning experience for the learning function where they took this idea of, oh, well, we have all this ILT, we'll just take whatever content exists for that and we can put it in an online format like we're on right now or some other sort of webinar format, and we can just show the content. And they realized rather quickly that the instructor facilitator skill set is not the same between real life in person and virtual, and not everyone has both. And that's a key element that you need to focus on. And that's just the fact, even though companies understand the dynamics between ILT and digital and virtual, they're really recognizing that when you take something out of that in-person classroom or workshop or whatever that in-person event is, you've immediately sucked all of this inherent engagement right out of it. The stuff that you didn't have to think about. People were engaged because they were in the same room. They were looking at each other, talking to each other. No one even thought of it. And so when we talk about engagement and content and things like that, people don't realize that, well, in an in-person experience, you've got all that baked in and you don't even have to work on it. And now all of a sudden you've taken that away. That's when engagement becomes an issue. And so I think when companies were thinking about this previously, when they had this long-term vision of how we're going to do this, they weren't working that into the process because it wasn't so readily apparent. I think this immediate overnight switch has made it clear that you need a different strategy and a different approach, and you need to make sure that you're thinking about those kinds of things when you're buying content, creating content, delivering the content. What are you building into it that's going to keep people paying attention, keep them engaged, keep them connected?
And I think the experience is getting even better. And from the interviews that I've been on with, with our studies, and we're hearing that, the platforms, the solutions are easier. You don't have to have a background in coding or tech per se. And so it's just much easier connecting everybody that's involved with the training, the business leaders, the trainers, the users, the whole ecosystem, so that you can create content quicker and you can, it's more agile. So, and Samantha, you probably know more than anybody based on what your solution offers and the ability to do so. Do you find that you're seeing a lot of the ease of the speed to be much a better experience in creating and delivering, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, so from the LMS technology standpoint, certainly, I mean, one of the things that we've seen with this whole pandemic and the response to it is that it gives, it gives companies the ability to really respond on a dime. So this whole idea of adaptability and agility, that if you're going to, scale is a huge thing. Now with SAP Litmos, you can scale to, literally, 1 million users if you had to. It gave companies that ability to respond that quickly. But on the flip side, there are probably companies that had to reduce what they were doing in some regards. So the LMS now has become, it's much, much easier, as you say, Rachel. You don't need to you don't even need IT really. Unless you're doing some really complex, custom integrations, that type of stuff. But, L&D has been able to wrap their arms around LMS technology to be able to do this stuff on their own. Just, some of the admin functions have become much easier in regard to, adding users and scaling. Now, from the content side, because we are also a major content provider at SAP Litmos, so we are seeing lots of companies who they're not going to bother creating, in regard to the pandemic, they're not going to bother creating their own hygiene courses or health and safety courses or various courses that are related to what's going on. They're going to buy that content, hopefully from us. But that content is readily available off the, well, hey, our content's one, we have a fabulous team that creates all video-based stuff that's very engaging, and a lot of it's micro and all those buzzwords. But a lot of the companies really are turning now to content providers to buy the content. That why would you create it yourself? You're going to create a hand hygiene course? No, probably not. You're going to come buy it and get it off the shelf, and that just makes it easy and fast. And again, it adds tremendously to that agility factor and the speed factor, because you need it now.
Mm-hmm. And that's a best practice, because you really don't need the content that companies should be creating is what's unique to them. If they have specific tools or solutions, sales training, that obviously needs to be customized based on the company. But when it's some of the compliance training or just regulatory training that is more generic, then getting content off the shelf is the best way to go. It's quicker, it's easier, it's more cost effective. There's many benefits.
Yeah, and I think that's. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
that's a great conversation to have with companies, because when we talk, so many of them don't buy far enough into that, Rachel. They think that, well, yes, I know there's content out there for that, but we're unique and we're special and we do things differently here. And yes, of course, every organization has its own culture and its own way of doing things. But the reality is, you need to invest that time and money into creating this thing that really is fine on its own, whether you get it from a third party. Companies have to be willing to give up a little bit of that control over all the content. Now, the environment itself can be customized and configured, to represent your brand and the look and the feel and everything, but you don't have to go down and create every little nugget of content yourself just to make sure you've got your stamp on it.
Right. And it's funny, Rachel, even when you mention stuff like sales training, we even offer courses on sales mastery and that type of thing. Now, of course, that's for companies are going to need to continue to need to create their own proprietary content, of course, about their own products. But when it's talking about sort of even, general skill set by role, L&D might not have time to create that kind of stuff, and it is available. And then now, and David, you and I talked about this on the webinar, we are seeing a brand new appetite for things around mental health as well, which, that content was available pre-pandemic, but we're seeing a much, much larger appetite for that. Things that fall under the category of mental health, like mindfulness. We just released a learning path on mindfulness and stress management, ability to respond to change. Some of these things that, sure, they would have been really nice to have before, but now they're really must-haves. And a lot of companies are realizing, if we don't consider mental health just as important as, health and safety in the physical realm, that you're just not going to have as productive a workforce, especially in these strange times where, I could have a 2-year-old running by while I'm trying to work. So,
Rachel, you've got some insight into this too. I think along those same lines, we've seen in our research that diversity and inclusion skills and information and knowledge has become actually critical in this time too, because just like that idea of taking the engagement away because you're not in the same room, the ability for someone to suddenly feel isolated and not included and feel like the diversity of an organization is falling apart has now exacerbated greatly because everyone's far flung. And so, Rachel, you've seen stuff. I know, just like looking in some of our other COVID research that we've done, that's a big issue now too, right?
Yes. So it's becoming, in our research, it has always expressed an interest for diversity and inclusion, yet companies don't make it a priority. So now we're seeing more action that's supporting words. And, I'll, in the future, in the next couple of years here, I think a lot of companies, if they don't have a strategy, they may have some things that cover diversity, like some mandatory take this course and check it off the box. But even more so, companies right now are I'm hearing a lot, okay, we're putting together a council, we're putting together a strategy, we're mapping it to, learning to talent. And so that's going to be a big area of focus for a lot of organizations, and to be pushed by leadership because, most companies are diverse. So they are, and anything that's occurring right now with social riots and the pandemic, it's creating a lot of uncertainty. So equally, I think it's important is mental health and ensuring that your employees have resources that they can tap into and that they feel comfortable tapping into those resources, because everybody's at an individual, everybody's at a different place. Some are perhaps better positioned to be organized and set up at home, some are not. For example, we weren't planning on renovating our home in the beginning of the year, so we had moved out into a smaller house, and there's 5 of us. And the internet wasn't working well, and we were all kind of juggling how to maneuver from one main area when the 16-year-old needs to do a Zoom with his class and the 13-year-old, and I'm trying to help our 7-year-old stay on track, and And so we'd go outside to take a virtual call or conference call either. And the garbage truck is driving by. So you have all these things that you're not expecting to have, and it's happening to everybody. Some, are handling it better than others. And so I think as leaders and organizations and the company like SAP Litmos that has resources that are helping their clients be able to tap into those, it's critical. And then the strategy is equally critical. What else, Samantha, do you feel, and Dave, going forward, what do you expect? What do you predict based on?
I was going to add something similar to what you were just saying, Rachel, which is, and this is actually, David, almost like the metaphor of what you were saying before, when an instructor is really great in a live environment, but then you say, oh no, now you have to take this into a digital environment, and that instructor might not necessarily feel comfortable, and there's a learning curve there. Another area of content that we're really seeing companies eat up is this idea of how to manage a remote team. And so it's similar to what you're talking about, Rachel, of like inclusion and diversity. How, if you were a manager who formerly your team was right there, your desk is 4 feet away and I can go over and talk to you and I can have my team meeting and everyone's around each other. That a lot of those managers are now facing brand new challenges about how do I manage my people who, for example, on our team, on the SAP Litmos marketing team, I mean, we have people just on our little marketing team globally located. We've got a couple of people in Australia. We've got, and so our managers are used to doing that. But if you're not used to managing a remote team, there is a different skill set that's involved. And we've been actually offering content on how to do that in ways that you do include everyone and make sure that people are not starting to feel disconnected and disengaged and, just not part of a team anymore. So that's a brand new challenge that a lot of organizations are facing.
For sure. We've seen that in our research as well. And, the conversations that we have with companies and the challenges for managers, how do I connect frequently enough with people who are remote so that we feel connected, but they don't feel like I'm micromanaging them because they're not here. And that is a really hard balance to strike, I think, for a lot of organizations. And I think, going off of that and going back to your what's the future like, Rachel, is I think there's a common theme through all of this, through those management skills, through the mental health issues or the diversity inclusion, to the learning technology strategy. The thread is everything that we've brought up is stuff that we've been talking to companies about for years. And everyone says, yeah, that's great. No, we get it. That makes a lot of sense. And companies have been going through digital transformation for, it's back in vogue for the last couple of years. But I don't think when everyone's thinking about these things, when they say, okay, we need to be agile, we need to be prepared, nobody had this as their sort of endpoint for what they were being agile for, right? It was this abstract future state that they were like, well, we just need to be agile enough to deal with, I don't know, the next cycle of the economy or whatever it is. Now everyone realizes, no, we need to be ready for this, which will by default make us ready for everything else. And so it's in a way, it's a bad thing, obviously, but it's done a lot for opening people's eyes of what's possible and what are we preparing for. Because now you can't say, well, that won't happen, because here we are. And I think it's really kicked everything into high gear across all these strategies.
Yeah, we hear the word adapt, and leaders need to be adaptable, organizations need to be adaptable, the solutions need to be adaptable, but more so now than ever before, adaptable is not just a word, it's something that in order for companies to thrive and to survive and to scale and really sustain themselves, they have to adapt to what we're all dealing with right now. And so, eventually there'll be a new normal, but I think we're kind of here for a while. And so, and a lot of companies are doing a great job, I'd say, and there are still companies that are very strong and they're able to transition their entire workforce practically remote, except for maybe, certain types of roles. If like physicians or or those that are in manufacturing, that are essential. So, but for those companies that have been able to just shift their entire workforce remotely, and they are, they're positive about what they're doing, and they're excited about what they have been able to do in such a short time frame. It's amazing. It truly is amazing. And Samantha, if you'd like to share before we end.
Rachel, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Your line was cutting in and out there. I apologize.
Is there anything before we wrap up that you'd like to share with our listeners, or any advice you'd like to offer?
Well, I think, I guess our prediction from the SAP Litmos side going forward is, as you mentioned, I think things are going to be like this for quite a while. So if those few companies that didn't embrace an online learning platform, right away back in March or April, boy, if they didn't do it then, they're certainly realizing that they need to do it now, and sooner than later, because we're going to be, the world really has changed. And then I also think, just from a prediction standpoint, as far as the future of learning, is that whenever things do return to a more, what we used to call normal, when things do return to more in-person spaces and shared spaces, that I think we're going to still see the e-learning percentage of the whole learning mix. I think we're still going to see the e-learning percentage higher than it was pre-pandemic. And I know that's in some of your research, David, that you mentioned in the webinar, that I think it was like 3 times, the prediction is that it would be like 3 times higher than it was pre-pandemic, which is not to say that we're not going to return to ILT, of course that's going to come back in, but that now that scale has tilted to like more e-learning, and it's probably going to stay higher than it was even before all this happened.
Yeah, it's a massive pendulum swing, which, it swung all the way to one direction, and yes, the pendulum will swing back, but it will never come back to where it was, and that's just the fact, right? Whenever he says new normal or whatever phraseology you want to use, it will not be what it was before. Even if this disease is eradicated and any safeguards, we don't need them anymore, anything like that, it will not be what it was. We've seen in our research there will be more remote work going forward than there was prior. It won't stay at these levels, but it will not go back to what it was before. The use of digital learning will stay high. It'll drop back down, but it will never drop back down to where it was. And same thing with ILT. There's a chance ILT could still come out and still be in the top of ways things are delivered, but it will share that stage with at least with the digital options, because it will not go back to the way it was.
Yeah, and one last note on this is that this is a good thing, and I think one of the big lessons that a lot of companies have learned, both about remote work and about e-learning, is that people like it. Your employees like it, a lot of people who didn't get to work from home, I could say several personal examples of people that didn't, work from home in the past, and now say, after all this, I wouldn't mind doing a couple days from home. I'm actually really productive when I'm at home. And then similar with the e-learning is that your users like it. It's way more convenient. They can do it anywhere, anytime. They can squeeze it in while they're on the bus. They can, it's just, as companies are offering this new option to people, they're realizing, wow, we're actually keeping people happier. The employee experience is actually better now that we're offering this digital flexibility.
Yeah, and we're seeing it somewhat anecdotal, but one thing I'm picking up on is when people are working from their home office, they're more likely to engage in things like, so I use our webinars as an example. A certain number of people will sign up for a webinar, and then a certain percentage will actually attend the webinar, and that's just the way it goes. And what we've seen since this has started is that percentage is actually far higher than it was in the past. People are actually, they're signing up, but more people are actually attending. And what I think is happening, again, this is anecdotal, it's from conversations that I've had, but when you're in your home office, you feel like, oh, you know what, I think I would like to attend this webinar. I think it would be helpful for me. you feel more comfortable doing that in your home office than say in your office where you feel like it's not work and it's aside from something and it feels more personal. Same thing with sort of those digital learning. If it's something that I've explored, I looked up, decided I wanted to learn about it. You feel as though, well, that's not my job. It feels extra and I feel weird doing it in the office. But you're at home, it's like, no, I think I have time to do this. I can slot this. And so we're seeing a pickup on this type of learn. People are going to explore more. They're going to engage more with these assets than they may have if they're, either in their own office or in a room with other people. So I think I hate you, and you said it and I agreed when you say it's a good thing. It's hard to say that, but when you, through the lens of all of what's going on with businesses, these are good changes.
That's a good perspective. Yeah. Well, thank you both for joining me today and continuing the discussion from your webinar. All interesting points of view, and a lot of thank you for sharing, Samantha, about your background and what's happening at SAP Litmos. All great stuff. So, and anybody that is interested in learning more, please follow up with us on Twitter, our website. You can email us at success@Brandon Hall, and we'd be happy to also put you in touch with Samantha and her team. Have a great week. Have a happy Monday. Be safe, be healthy. Take care.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Looking forward to seeing you in person again sometime soon.
Yeah. Hopefully soon. Bye.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.